Hey everyone, welcome back to the video. This is Luke with Luke F1 Fantasy, kicking off the week with a buy, hold and sell video where we're going to be talking about all the assets as we look forward to the Austria Grand Prix. Now, we do have a week off, so we have a little bit of time to digest all the incidents and storylines from Canada, and we do have a lot to talk about. As we like to start off these videos, we are back with the radio message of the week segment, where this part of the video, the team radio, has become our therapy and our comedy. And this week, Fernando Alonso, doing Fernando Alonso things, is a winner of this week, with delivering passive-aggressive poetry with the Spaniard's flair, casually being told by his race engineer that he needs to ease up and take it gently through turns 3 and 8. But Alonso, with the reply of, "We are racing, not testing," which I think is a great representative for Fernando Alonso in his most recent performances. He is looking incredibly racy out there. He has over 22 overtakes in the last 2 races. So there are certainly some good vibes at Aston that we need to pay attention to. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us. When anyone tells us to take it easy, maybe we need to channel our inner Alonso and politely remind them we are racing, not testing. So that's my challenge for the viewers out there, to see if you can slip that into a conversation in your personal lives between now and the next video. So let me know. Let me know if you can do that, and drop a comment to let me know what the situation was, if you can pull that out of the bag. Okay, so moving along into the Canada debrief. Well, if you're following me along on Twitter, you will know that I locked in with a team of Lando as my 2X, and I flipped in Alonso for Bortoleto. So I definitely got burnt quite a bit this week. A huge drop in rank, dropped from 200 into the 800s, had a really poor performance in points, but the budget still remained fairly positive in the growth direction. So what went right? Well, we moved off Piastri, and considering that Piastri didn't win the race or pick up any other bonus points, including drive the day of fastest lap, and he finished off the podium, it was the right week to move off Piastri. It also was the right week to bring in Fernando Alonso, who saw a 0.6 million increase after scoring 22 points. So somewhat of a forced decision, because that's what I was left with on my budget-wise once I bought in Lando. But another solid decision was moving Bortoleto out instead of Colapinto. Although Bortoleto scored a few more points than Franco did do enough to secure the 0.2 million increase. So that was the reason to kind of choose him over Bortoleto for the budget increase, and it did pay off. Now, what went wrong? Well, the big one was not picking the right 2X driver. So Lando was in contention, George Russell was in contention, Max Verstappen was in contention, Charles Leclerc was in contention. So there was definitely, a 25% chance that one of those would work out. And unfortunately, I ended up having a bad luck and choosing Lando, and him being the one that DNF, which obviously caused the huge swing and was the main reason for the swing in points. Nevertheless, the decision was still the right one to make. It just made the wrong choice on top of that, which compounded the error. And then I guess you could say that not moving off Ferrari and going into Mercedes was potentially a mistake as well. So that leaves us in a position where we are looking at moving out a few assets for the next race. Lawson, Norris, potentially Ferrari, potentially Colapinto. Fortunately, I do have the wild card still to play as one of my options, so that does help me in a situation like this week, where there is an option to make 2 moves, or there is the option to completely rechange the structure of the team. So before we get into some team selections, we will look into our buy, hold, and sell feature of the week. And we're starting off with Russell, who kicks off the buy category for the A-tier drivers. Now, Russell has proved me wrong. He's basically the first race winner outside of Max or McLaren. And honestly, up until this week, I didn't think another team was able to beat McLaren. Right now, Russell has to get 12 points for a max rise. And what Mercedes has shown us is that they can perform in decent weather. They do have the race pace to stay ahead of Max plus McLaren's. And slightly looking ahead to Austria, it may be looking a similar track to Canada in that there's hard braking zones, long DRS straights. He did win in Austria last year, so there is certainly some good vibes around Russell for that. Now, Piastri, yes, I know. He shouldn't really be in the buy category. He should really be in the hold category. But just because I sold him, he now is in the buy category. But for those of you that were the Piastri remainers, he's going to remain a hold for you. And there's not really more to be said. There's ice in his veins. He is showing that he is standing up to the pressure of being a favorite for the World Drivers' Championship. And he needs 2 points for a small and 24 for a max price size. So well within his range. And into our hold categories, I have Verstappen and Norris into these. And let me get to Norris in a little bit. But Verstappen, while all the noise in the weekend in the practices leading up was around Mercedes rising, Ferrari still in the mix, it's still Verstappen that still ends up taking second position. Now, he does need 60 points for a max price rise. So I don't think you're putting him in for a budget builder. But heading into Austria, this is Red Bull's home race. It is a favorite track for Max. So I would hold him until we see the FP3 results and swap out as needed. Now, Norris I have in the hold category. It was his worst performance of the year. He is the most expensive asset, and he needs a whopping 86 points needed for a big price rise, 58 points to avoid a price decrease. So he's definitely not a budget builder, but I'm still going to hold him until FP3. I'm just saying, your teams might have other needs. Lawson, moving him out. Ferrari, maybe swapping them out. So maybe, just maybe, you'll want to see what Norris and McLaren's pace again is like in practice. Now, you need to proceed with caution. We've seen what Norris can do. When the pressure gets to him, he just crumbles like a wet paper bag. But if you do have 3 free transfers or a wild card to use, then I do put him as a sell. It's going to be hard to trust Norris again, just based on sort of what we've seen, the vibes around him. Again, I think if McLaren are looking dominant for a 1-2, then on those weeks, I could consider Norris as a differential to Piastri. But on a weekend like this, what I've learned is that when other teams are kind of pushing for podiums and even the top spot, like Mercedes were doing, that then I don't think I would choose Norris over Piastri. I think I would stick with the more consistent driver in Piastri. Now we have Leclerc filling out the sell category. He could have stayed in the hold or buy column, but he's here based on my budget. But if you are 117.3 million, he's an option for you as your second A-tier driver. But with only 17 points in his last race, he may not be a hold for Silverstone. So perhaps I would look to sell him now. We have to remember with Charles, though, like he was putting in a blistering pace in FP3, and in quali, he pulled out a purple first sector on his flying lap, the one where he hits Hadjar's dirty air. So we were kind of robbed on seeing what lap time Charles could have pulled out in Ferrari. I always thought he had a chance in qualifying, considering the pace he put out in FP3, and that he was kind of running a few more sets of newer tyres than other drivers due to sort of missing FP1 and FP2. So in another alternate reality, we could have seen Leclerc easily have snatched a top row position, and that would have changed the entire complex of the weekend. So I do want to put that into context for Charles Leclerc. Now, the meat of the video is going to be our B-tier drivers, and certainly different from last week, we have a few more assets to really consider as buys for this week. Now, the top 2 are going to be your must buys and probably would make up at least 1, if not 2, of majority of teams' transfers going into Austria. But for Hulk, he's a buy because for Norris owners, we just couldn't afford him. If you didn't have Hulkenberg last week, he is a massive buy. If you were a Piastri owner and you already had Hulkenberg mixed into your team, then he will be a hold. But he needs to score over -21 for a max budget. So that's a definite increase. Those kick upgrades continue to shine. And he has 20 overtakes in the past 2 weeks, which is the second highest out of all B tiers currently. So you can buy now for a cheap 0.6 million, bumps your budget. Because of that, he would be an own for a 1.2 weeks. So there is definitely some budget to be gained, possibly over 1.2 million with Nico Hulkenberg over the next 2 weeks. Alonso is the on-par strong buy in the B tiers, very equal to Hulkenberg. Now, Alonso is the only person to have more overtakes than Nico Hulkenberg in the last 2 races with 22. As we saw from the radio message, he is feeling incredibly racy. He's not going to listen to his engineers. He is feeling some good vibes around Aston, and Alonso is loving it, and he is taking full advantage. Quite possibly would say Aston and Alonso on a good day would likely perform just as good as Alex Albon or Carlos Sainz in a Williams on a good day. I think there is certainly signs that we're seeing top 6 to top 8 is available now for Alonso. So he was averaging -5 points a race, but he's now averaged 18 points per race in the last 2. He received his first price rise of the season this week with a 0.6 million increase, and based on his current performances and price points, he is a good hold for 2 weeks. Now we have Pierre Gasly back in the mix, right on cue, 2 good performances, and now he's in our thoughts. We've been burnt twice this season, with every time he's coming into our thoughts. On that 3rd race, he does have a DNF. So this one is going to come with a lot of risk and a lot of PTSD. But Pierre Gasly, he's having low overtakes in general. The race pace isn't the most explosive. That Alpine seems to have stalled, if not going backwards. But he does tend to score the points when others around him fall or DNF. You can buy him if your budget is more leaning towards that way. Alonso is definitely still the better pick for price and for budget. So I think I'd look elsewhere. But he stays in the buy category for his price rise potential, needing only 5 points for a max increase and 0 for a minor increase. Now, Bortoleto comes into the buy category because if you sold Bortoleto for Colapinto and you have enough transfers, then you did make the right call on points, but you did lose out on budget gain. And Bortoleto is now the only remaining 4.5 million asset in the game. So if you're looking to squeeze into a 4A build, if you have one of those top tier budgets currently, then I think he becomes back on your list. He protects your budget. And he only needs 4 points for a small and 8 points for a max budget increase. So there is still upside, albeit quite small. Now, Carlos Sainz is back in our mix, and he is very close to his floor, if not has reached it at 8.3 million. And something that I talked about last week in my video. So in the last few races, he's averaging 4.5 overtakes a race. He has secured 5 top 10s in the last 6 races. So he is in his prime position to see his first price rises of the season. He needs 3 for a small, 10 for a max price increase. And that is well within his reach. So we're going to have to see where Williams' pace is like in Austria in the free practices. It definitely was looking good in Canada, Austria being a track that could be very similar. But we'll have to really consider the reliability at Williams. And I do think Sainz will be a very popular pick already going into the week. Now we have Isaac Hadjar as a hold. A little bit of a poor week, only 1 point scored, but because of his past performances, he's looking at 2 points for a small and 8 points for a massive price rise. It's well within his reach, and without grid penalties this week, his race may have been different. I think he's a luxury transfer out though, so I would hold him. But I think we've seen enough for him to give him a pass for this week. Due to the low performance, this might be the last week we do have Hadjar, so I would consider cashing in on him next week if he has another low-scoring performance. Now, if you roll with Colapinto, you were rewarded with a price increase and a good bounce back for him. So we're going to have to watch this space on Franco Colapinto because he could be a forced transfer out in Silverstone. I have heard nothing on that to date, but he hasn't been setting the world alight with his performances. I don't really know where they go from here if they do move on for him. But at 5 at 9 points for an increase, if you're still going to hold him at a higher rotate track and him averaging 3.3 overtakes per race, there is potential that he could get you a little small budget increase again. He's also sort of a semi-budget protector because he can only really drop 0.2 million. So I would consider your other priorities first, and if you have the transfers, move Colapinto out if you can. Now, Liam Lawson is a prime sell. He suffered a DNF in Canada, meaning he needs 24 and 29 points for a price increase. And it's just really unfortunate. You know, Lawson was a huge budget builder for Spain, and we saw the 0.6 million from him, and many of us held him into Canada. But what we've seen now is that the DNF has caused him to take a 0.6 million decrease anyway. So we're selling him for basically net the same, but ultimately we've lost 11 points because of having him in our teams for 2 weeks. So that's just something to be aware of, and just something I wanted to point out. Now, for our constructors, I cannot really decide between all of these right now. So I'm putting all 4 A-tier constructors into the hold category. There are so many variables week to week. You know, McLaren, I look at them and think, did they come back to the field this week? Or was it just mistakes from both Piastri and Norris in qualifying and the race that really brought the gap to the field down? Or did we see other teams just improve their performance a little bit? McLaren seem to be having the edge over teams that seem really dominant in tracks which are sort of fast. They have these sort of long, flowy, high-speed corners. That's where they tend to shine. But tracks that don't have that, especially ones with high braking, Monaco, Canada, potentially Austria, it seems like, especially Mercedes, can decrease the gap to them. So we're going to have to see where the gap lies in practices between all 4 constructors. From a budget building perspective, all 4 are well within reach to secure their max price increases. So don't think that should be a differentiating factor between all 4. So then once again, it comes down to your team makeup and performance. And as we have seen, it may be worth using one of our transfers each week to change our constructors. And it may not be a set and forget. This is where potentially the main points differential lies, especially when it comes to DNF. But generally on a week where you have 2 DNFs in your team, like I did with Norris and Liam Lawson, and if I only want to use two transfers, I may be forced to run with the team that I currently have. So if you have Mercedes, you only have 2 transfers, you have others to focus on, you probably roll with them, similarly to Ferraris. But if you do have 3 free transfers, you maybe consider swapping out them if you continue to believe in the pace in Mercedes, which did look really good and potentially could be a hold for 2 weeks as well. I think one of the biggest deciding factors is really like Antonelli versus Hamilton each week. Now looking at our B-tier constructors for ourselves. So if you're still running the 1B constructors and you are looking for an alternative, I have narrowed it down to 2 main buys that you need to look at. First one being Kick, the second one being Aston Martin. So Kick have the highest margin of error this week, between minus 59 and minus 50 points. Anything above that, you're going to see a price increase. So they have got double the insurance policy on them. They're also returning a value on points as well, with 28 points on average over the last 2 weeks. For those of you with low budgets, or for those that want to try and get into a 2 premium A's drivers build, Kick is definitely a buy. And because of that margin for error, they are a good hold for Silverstone too. They are averaging 6.2 overtakes a race, but more importantly, in the most recent form, they have 28 overtakes in the last 2 races. And while Hulkenberg has been scoring most of those, Bortoleto has still pulled out a few with 8 overtakes in the last 2 races. Now, Aston Martin, like I said, with their recent upgrades, I believe they are now challenging for the 5th best team in F1. Now, they are a little bit more expensive at 8.9 million, but only need 1 point for a max increase. Now, I think they do have a slightly better upside in points than Kick, but Kick really just seems to be proving us wrong from week-to-week basis that they can pull out these spiky performances. So, at some point we're going to have to believe that Kick's resurgence has been more than a fluke. But coming back to Aston, they are averaging 6-point overtakes a race. And again, the most recent form, they have 24 overtakes in the last 2 races. Now, Alonso is pulling the heavy work mainly, though. So this comes down to, do you trust Stroll more than Bortoleto? So with all that being said, now looking into our team selections, well, like I said, I do have the wildcard chip in my back pocket. And for those of you that still have that, then I do think next week in Canada is a strong consideration to be pulling the trigger on our wildcard. Now, if I wasn't going to do that just yet, my 2 transfers, if I just wanted to use my 2 transfers, not really do anything too spectacular or different, then I think it's quite easy with the budget I have. I would just swap out Lando Norris and Lawson for Oscar Piastri and Hulk. So essentially get back to a template build, focusing on budget, some upside in points, and having to roll with Ferrari. So on a week where Ferrari may look good, then I would continue to roll with this team. Now, for those of you who ran the Piastri Hulk build last week, potentially with Ferrari or Mercedes, it doesn't really matter which. I think you have a clear transfer this week in swapping out Liam Lawson and bringing in a Fernando Alonso. If you were wanting to make a second transfer and you weren't feeling the Franco Colapinto vibes any longer, and if you had over 112.6 million, then you could also consider swapping out Colapinto for Sainz. And this would also work if you had Bortoleto in that team as well. Now, those of you that have reached a budget of 115.3 million minimum or above, and if you are a believer in Mercedes, there are a couple 4A builds that are now available for fantasy owners to run. The first is a Piastri Antonelli McLaren Mercedes build, which does look quite good on paper from points if Mercedes continue to do well. And this team would be filled out with an Alonso, Colapinto, and Bortoleto. So not too much budget potential available. And I would say this is a week too early for this team, with Antonelli looking to drop in points and you missing out from other budget builders like Hulkenberg and Gasly. So I don't think this team is too viable just yet. And if you had 115.3, there is another 4A build that is currently available, which is the Ferrari, Mercedes, Piastri, Russell build. Again, filling out with 3 of the lowest priced assets in the game to date. So these aren't quite strong enough to use just yet, I don't believe, but it is a bit of an indication that we are moving towards this. So this may be starting to this may be starting to play into position where we look into how we're going to structure our teams for the next few weeks. Now, if you had 119.2 million, which I know some people do have, you can get into a McLaren, Mercedes, Russell, Piastri build. So that is on high alert for those of you that have that. And I'm 2.9 million away from needing that. We'll likely need a little bit more, considering that some of those assets will increase by the time I'll be able to afford it. So this is on my mind currently as to making sure I don't miss out anymore on potentially easy budget gains, because 4A is becoming more and more likely very soon. So I don't really have any predictions on the meta this week. I don't think it's clear. I think what is clear is that there's probably going to be a main structure of Piastri, Hulkenberg, Alonso, and Hadjar. And then there's going to be quite a mix of different teams running Ferrari or Mercedes, some throwing in Sainz, Gasly, and some rolling with Colapinto, Bortoleto to round out the other positions. So I think next week's going to be another week where we're going to see some quite variety in team points and team moves, and it kind of depends on where you're coming from to see which way you want to go. Now, like I spoke about, the wildcard is an option for me, and I'm only really considering this if I'm looking to make at least four moves minimum. And currently, I'm looking at this wildcard option, which would take me 5 transfers to get into. So this would be bringing in Oscar, Nico, George Russell, Carlos Sainz, and Aston Martin. Now, what I do like about this team is that I have good budget rise potential from all assets on here. Not just for 1 week, potentially 2. This is the type of team with Aston Martin, if they can kind of secure this top 5 position, essentially take up the position that Williams were having in recent weeks, Racing Bulls have had in recent weeks. If Aston Martin can sort of jump on their time to shine and get a couple, top 5 constructor performances in the next 2 weeks, then by the end of Silverstone, I could have a budget of over 120 million going into the summer break. Now, that really entices me. and that would kind of put me back in the mix. And as long as Aston Martin don't completely ruin their race, get a DNF, we've seen that this 1B constructor, 2A driver is a competitive build. So while I have run the 2A constructor build for a while, I can see myself switching into this build if all things look well and good for that race. And I would be okay you running this for 2 weeks, just to kind of get a little bit more of the extra budget. But I do like the upside of what my budget can be after Silverstone. We're going into the summer break. Be nice to kind of sit there over the summer with 120 million in my bank, with then sort of looking to maximize points in the second half of the season. That being said, the safer option would be to sort of just kind of stick with more of the template type build right now, but which I would still wildcard to get into, which would be swapping into Mercedes, again bringing in Oscar, again bringing in Hulkenberg, and bringing in Sainz, and sticking with Isaac Hadjar as that build too, which I think kind of puts me back into the meta style of template. So I am thankful that I have this wild card to use to get back into it as well. And lastly, looking into my league review. So while I was bragging that I had taken a top spot in my own league last week, that performance that I've had this week has completely changed the script again. So I've now dropped down to 6, and we have Slowpoke Racing, Dimitri Yudu taking top spot with 2,332 points. So now a good solid lead over me. So congrats to you. And specific shout out to Leo with Lunfic Racing, who won this week with 202 points. Just a cracking, massive score, with a team of Oscar, Sainz, Hadjar, Colapinto, Hulkenberg, McLaren, and Mercedes. So definitely made a lot of solid choices there, Leo. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this video, everyone. Thanks again for watching. Remember to hit that like and subscribe. Drop your comments down below. Let us know the teams that you ran. I want to see all those Mercedes builds and give you guys some props for that. Otherwise, I'll be back with a video likely at the end of next week, so sort of following FP2 again. So as we get ready for the deadline. So enjoy your week off from F1 Fantasy, and we'll see you on the next one.